Now on to 132.
132.18, would you like to speak on that?
Do you have any comments on it? Am I going to be the only one with comments on this case?
I don't know.
132-18.
I don't know why it's not on my notes. 128.18. Which one is it?
132. We're on 132.
132.
132.18.
That's one with the 7-year-old.
Oh my God. Yeah, I have thoughts on that one.
So why don't you go ahead?
All right, well, so this is a case where we didn't have, the CPOA didn't have unlimited or an extended period of time to investigate because we asked the APOA for a time waiver because the collective bargaining agreement limits the amount of time in which you can make disciplinary recommendations. And so it seems like when they got this complaint, that the CPOA did not think that they could finish the investigation in the amount of time necessary to make those disciplinary recommendations. So it appears that what they ultimately did was just wrapped it up in enough time to get that recommendation out. So, so I believe that these findings have already gone to APD, and that's something I would ask Director Harness for clarification on if he were here, but that's what I understand from the conversations we've had about this case in this committee leading up to now. I think we need to do something, however, because, I mean, there is also an argument that just because you can't get it done within the time frame provided by the collective bargaining agreement, that you have to stop investigating, right? You just lose your ability to make enforceable discipline or quasi-enforceable disciplinary recommendations. And I really don't think there is a dispute aside from there being language in this letter to this effect. I don't think the CPOA will dispute that this was not a thorough investigation on our end. Right. I think they've acknowledged readily that this was, I think the words the CPOA has used were narrow in scope because of the time limitation.
Let me go. Can I add one thing?
Sure.
One of the things that I think is worthy of note is this is the very first time that in all the years I've been doing this, that the APOA has not agreed to extend the time.
That's interesting.
And so I think that by itself is worthy of us. I absolutely agree that we should not be confined by their artificial timeline.
Yeah, and I mean, we aren't at all, except for the disciplinary part.
Well, that's true, but I think that there's, if we want to give DOJ and the mayor and the city council feedback on how this process is working, this is a great example of the APOA interfering with the quality of the investigation by not getting it enough time, by not extending it.
Yeah.
And so, certainly that's part of our obligation.
To that end, what would you recommend doing about that?
I would send it back to the agency to say, do the full investigation now. We understand why you did this in the time frame you did, but we want to make sure that you fully investigated it.
Yeah, but as far as giving feedback to, the administration about the APOAs.
Let's see what they find out. But I think that we need to compare and
we need to finish the investigation before we say something.
And then we wrap that in a bundle and say, here's what we discovered with this cursory investigation. Here's what we discovered upon more. You and everybody should be concerned about the APOA for the first time not allowing us to, not allowing the timeline to be extended.
Right, especially in a case of, with such sensitive and important issues.
Well, I mean, it's on the heels of Omar Burrell, it's on the heels of...
right, this is happening over and over again in Albuquerque, these. And I also want to send it back. And it's to complete the investigation so that I think this was sent to us by former board member Larson as a citizen or third-party complainant. Mm-hmm. He made 5 different complaints, and he provided, some evidence, some starting points in each of those complaints. I would want all of those investigated. Mm-hmm. They're not all in here. And additionally, as to what is in here, there are findings that I just do not agree with. I do not agree with the finding regarding what happened with the soiled underwear. I do believe there was an SOP violation. In my own research, I think that we had an issue with, I think SOP 5-5 is implicated, was triggered by these facts, and I think SOP 5-8 comes into play, and that's a question of when do you call a crime scene specialist to handle forensic evidence? And they should have, I do believe that APD should have gotten to a conclusion that they needed to gather that evidence. There are some arguments in here, and they were also made to the media. One about a chain of custody problem, and that is not for them to determine. That is something that is litigated in a courtroom. It's not for an officer to litigate.
Well, I have another problem with this case that also came to mind, and one of the things that surprised me was that the staff tried to reach the CYFD, the staff of the school tried to reach CYFD and had trouble doing that, according to this report, multiple times. But in addition to that, the person they chose to go to was not APD or Crimes Against Children, which they could have done, but to an officer who was volunteering at the school. I wonder why that officer didn't call in whoever needed to be called in. I mean, there seems to be that there would be a protocol relative to that.
Well, and those were, the CPOA did sustain violations as to that officer for not doing what should have been done for that call. But I think separate, I mean, I agree also that there is a question here, and it's really, I don't know if it's really within our purview because we're here to figure out whether or not SOPs were violated. But there is a serious question here about why are teachers having a hard time making contact with CYFD? What is that? Where is the critical failure?
We could ask, for example, we could ask the Crimes Against Children unit, the CACU, to come here, the sergeant, whoever's in charge of that, and talk to us about that. There's nothing, we're here for policy. We're here to understand what's broken in this system. And I don't think it's outside of our purview at all to ask that question, you know, and teach us how it's supposed to be, because just saying it's all cool to the public is not all cool. I mean, it's not.
I really like that idea because maybe they can come up with a solution and they could educate the schools when you have a problem, this is what you do.
Well,
and it doesn't seem like it's happening.
And I think that Mr. Larson, when he was on the board, worked to that end.
Yeah.
I think he tried hard to work, and he met with CACU. I just think we should talk to them again because we have too many cases.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying there is a distinction between CACU and CYFD.
Oh,
CYFD is just a totally different department that is not APD.
Yeah, but there's two roads to get to that, to get to child safety. One of them is CYFD, the other one is the police. And yes, they should be working in tandem together. But in this case, it seems like neither thing worked, neither one. Okay, and that's not okay. So we need to say, where is it broken? Our job is to look for cracks in the system. This is a crack in the system. Let's ask them to come and talk to us.
Yeah, I'm groovy. That's groovy with me. I mean, I would definitely like to hear from them. I think there is Mr. Larson in his complaint also brings up, and this is, I think, one of the ones of primary importance that it doesn't appear was analyzed as a part of the CPOA's investigation, is whether or not the Real-Time Crime Center Procedural Order 16-02 was properly implemented in this case, because had it been, it really seems as though the officers who went to the scene would have had all of the information they needed to handle this case appropriately.
In other words, the history of everything that came before.
They would have known about the 24 calls to CYFD. They would have known about all of the APD contact with the parents.
Why we have a Real-Time Crime Center.
Yeah, and the officers in this case, you know, made some statements about, oh, I wish I would have known this, I wish I would have known that before I did this, I should have known this, I should have known that, which seems like it must mean that either this RTCC procedural order is not properly implemented, or there was an SOP that wasn't being followed, because there are mechanisms in place to ensure that officers have that information. So why don't they? Why don't they when they go to that call out?
So will you recap for Katrina the things that when they go back, the policies and things you want checked against this to be included in this new review?
Yeah, and let me just finish making a couple of other comments.
Sure.
So I was saying that there were some arguments regarding the soiled underwear that appear here that I don't agree with, and one was made by the officers at the time regarding the chain of custody. And that is just something that I would state is not for them to litigate on a police call out. That's really a question for a courtroom, you know. If an attorney might have a question about a chain of custody, but just because a question like that might exist doesn't mean an officer should not collect the evidence. And so that's why I also think this, the SOP 5-8 comes up for me, SOP 2-71 comes up because they say, there's a statement in here that says, additionally, there was a question about whether or not APD had a right to seize the child's clothing without a search warrant or probable cause, and since they had no probable cause, they did not, and since they had no crime, there was no probable cause to seize it. That is just so patently erroneous legally, because probable cause is a standard, you know, that has to be met in order for the government,
they didn't
usually
ask
in this
the little
case,
girl for her underwear. The teacher had it, right?
Yeah.
So what's the problem?
Yeah. So so essentially, if they wanted to, you know, probable cause, they need that to arrest someone. They need it to look through your home, maybe to look through your car. They don't need it. If someone is just handing you evidence on a silver platter, there is no question of probable cause. And so this language that we're taking from them is just, it's just wrong. You know, it just doesn't make, it really just doesn't make legal sense.
So this is,
and so
Katrina, I want to make sure that you're getting all this because it's important that the new review of this case include all these parts.
It's being recorded, so I'm sure.
Well, I just want to make sure.
Yeah. So, and then there's also some statements, you know, that along these lines, when they say they had no crime, they had no probable cause, there really is an argument found in here, and an argument that was also made by, you know, the PR at the time, that, you know, well, the child was interviewed and didn't disclose anything. And I think that that's also wrong. I mean, I think there's a huge pile of evidence. It's not really, it can't be right. It can't be the case that the burden is on a small child to give, you know, officers to essentially like make direct allegations. The officers, I believe, had everything they needed to begin investigating, and they just didn't. Ultimately, it was the Attorney General who brought the case against the parents here. And so I think there were some real failures that we don't sufficiently address. And if it is true that there aren't SOP violations of this nature, then we have some major policy work to do. Right, absolutely. Because it just like these absolutely. Types of conclusions are just really not like, you know, from the perspective of a civilian, are just not tolerable.
Well, and I'm tired, frankly, of the dance between CYFD and APD. I'm tired of that whole dance. Mm-hmm. If there are complications or lack of clarity, which is what Jim was trying to do, was to say, tell me where they start and you end. It's never going to be a clean line, ever. Mm-hmm. And if this is in manufacturing, this is human beings. So there needs to be a resolution to that, first, last, and always, so that this doesn't happen again. Because right now, I'm seeing still fuzzy lines and a fuzzy dance going on, and I don't like it. I don't think the community likes it either. And so I think you're absolutely right. I think it needs to go back for all those reasons.
Yeah. Okay, so that would be That would be everything. In summary, it would just be, making sure that all 5 complaints made to us are all investigated. That additional SOPs be investigated, like 55, 58, 271, RTCC 1602. The rest that I may not have listed that may be found in our original complaint. Yeah, just a thorough and complete investigation.
Well, and I'd like to include in there a note from the staff that says whether I'm correct, and this is the first time that the APOA has not allowed an extension. I believe I'm right about that, but I'd like to know for sure.
Yeah.
If that's the case, you think it'd be beneficial to send a letter?
Well, that may this is not going nowhere. This is,
I mean, down the road too, that when we find out.
Let's get our eggs in a row and make sure
Yeah.
we got it.
Do the bundling Joanne mentioned, have a complete package before we make those kinds of moves.
Well, I mean, that's the consequence. If we don't show the difference between having 60 days or whatever it is to do it and having the extension to 120 days, then that's bad on us. We have to be able to show what we learned in that extra time that was not learnable in the 60 days or whatever it was. So I think it's really important. We're hamstringing our own staff if we don't bring that to task.
So let me make sure if this for case 13218, send back the letter. We want all 5 complaints investigated you're requesting. You stated that for APOA, the first time not granting the extension. And then the list of the SOPs were?
This is not an inclusive list, but SOPs that did come up for me right away were 5.5, more specifically 5.8, that relates back to 5.5. 2-71 is something that comes up because it's related to evidence that is you need probable cause for versus evidence that is found in plain sight, which is the type of evidence we had. RTCC 1602, 1702.
RTCC
16-02.
16-02.
17-02.
Okay.
SOP 14.
SOP. Oh, 14 you said?
Yeah, just 14.
Oh, 14.
Yeah. SOP 2-8-5A. Any other SOPs that come up as a part of a more thorough investigation, of course.
Yeah.
And then the third thing, Katrina, is that I am stating that I don't many of the conclusions we do have in here that I don't agree with these. Some of the things that were investigated, I don't agree with the findings.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to that point. We may all not agree with them. So you may not be alone, but we're all clear right now that it's an incomplete investigation.
Okay, well, I just feel like that's useful information for them, that some of this stuff, I mean, that's where I'm gonna head with it if it's not changed.
Maybe they'll change their own minds if the investigation is complete.
Yeah, okay, I'm good with that. Phew, I think we're done with that one.
Lots of nice work, thank you.
Great work, thank you.
Yes. Happy to do it.